Okay, so today we're going to be looking at 3 rebellions, and those rebellions, 2 of them you may never have heard of, and the rebellions are associated with those in Cymru that feel that the harsh rule of Edward I needs to be challenged. Now, I would like to nicely go to the next image, and we've got quite a few images to go through. Hopefully we'll get through them all tonight. And the first rebellion that we will look at tonight will be the rebellion of Dafydd ap Griffith, who is in fact the brother of Llywelyn the Last, Llywelyn ap Griffith. Now, there's an interesting story associated with Dafydd, and we do actually revisit this castle, which for those that have been there is Readlyn Castle. The places that we will visit can be, in a sense, thought to be obscure. And we'll look at the backdrop of this wonderful site in a few moments. This is known as Hawaiian Castle that some of you may never have heard of. This is in northeast Cymru. However, what we do look at is in the later rebellion that we will examine, the rebellion of Maddog ap Llywelyn. The rebellion of Maddog ap Llywelyn was so intense, it can only be classed as the second most intense uprisings or rebellions this country has ever seen after Owain Glyndwr's. Dafydd ap Griffith, he was born on the 11th of July 1238, died on the 3rd of October 1283. And Dafydd ap Griffith is the epitome of hung, drawing and quartering. And what I simply mean by that, hung, drawing and quartering was a dedicated profession increased and devised in use for the execution of this one fugitive, Dafydd ap Griffith, at the hands of Edward I. And then on in history, we see the likes of William Wallace, hung, drawing and quartering. And hung, drawing and quartering is still very fashionable in the late 1600s for traitors of the king. Dafydd ap Griffith was the last independent ruler of Cymru. He was one of 2 feuding brothers, Llywelyn, and then there's Dafydd. And there were other sons of Griffith, but the 2 that we're really interested in is Dafydd and Llywelyn. Now, one thing was they were constantly fighting and feuding, that it caused a level of instability across the land of Cymru. But somewhere in around the likes of 1255, Llywelyn ap Griffith defeated his brothers, and he became the sole ruler of the independent parts of Cymru. And he was recognised by King Henry as the ruler of Cymru in 1267. Dafydd befriended his brother in 1274. And then, not so long after, he rebelled against his brother, because his brother, Llywelyn ap Griffith, being the true ruler of the land of Cymru. And by about 1277, there was a reconciliation, and from that moment onwards, Dafydd and Llywelyn were to be friends. The whole interesting part of this chapter of history in regards to rebellions begins here at Hawaiian Castle. Hawaiian Castle, if we want to look, there is Hawaiian, where my little cursor is now. And we're probably not going to be able to draw as much as I usually do. So I'm just going to grab that on there anyway. Try and get my annotation button up. So for those that are struggling to see the screen, that there is where Hawaiian Castle is to be found. Moving on only slightly, is a very strange place to start a rebellion, to be honest with you. But this rebellion itself is the beginning of the end of independence for the princes of Cymru. Hawaiian was initially attacked by Dafydd ap Griffith in the Easter of 1282. This was the final conflict of an independent Cymru with England. Hawaiian Castle was a very important, powerful castle, and it was, no doubt, captured by Dafydd ap Griffith. This single event led to the English invading Cymru, and Llewellyn ap Griffith, King of Cymru, Prince of Cymru, however way you would like to refer to him as, was now at open war with Edward I. And it's sometimes said that on the 11th of December 1282, the only reason Llewellyn ap Griffith lost was he was lured into some kind of a trap. Come on, lads, I'm Edward I. Let's have a nice peace conference. That was one of the tricks of Edward I, and Llewellyn ap Griffith died. He was killed in a skirmish with a certain Adam de Frankton, and you'll know Adam de Frankton, Frampton Manor in the Vale of Glamorgan, Llantwit Major. So Hawaiian itself is the place, the seeds of the rebellion. Not long after, Hawaiian was captured by Edward I, and for a very, very short time, Dafydd the last of Cymru, Dafydd the last leader of an independent Cymru, retreated from Hawaiian on the border to the heartland of northwest Cymru. The last areas, the vestiges of an independent world. We're still looking at Hawaiian, and the point I'm trying to make here is that the very powerful, imposing site. If any of you ever get to go there, and like many of the places that we visited in these lectures, most of you may never have heard of. But Hawaiian Castle is quite interesting and quite an imposing castle. It's a shell keep. Basically, you got an inner courtyard, as you can see as you go down there. And what you have two walls, an internal wall, an internal wall, an external wall, and you've got a courtyard in the middle. So that's known as a shell keep. This is quite an imposing site, but Dafydd led quite a force and actually captured it, as we say, in Easter 1282. But in no time at all, Dafydd was on his own. January 1283. Dafydd stood alone as the remaining power in Cymru, the remaining independent power in Cymru. And the site that I kept away from my lecture when we were looking at castles of Cymru is a site that we're going to gently go on to, known as Dolwedden Castle. But before we go on to Dolwedden Castle, those that have got pens and paper can just have a look at this. Now, that, interestingly enough, is the coat of arms of the House of Aberfraw, the House of Gwynedd, the Kingdom of Gwynedd, which were the predominant rulers of Cymru. And interestingly enough, the coat of arms of Dafydd was actually blue, but with all these lions. These two brothers don't last into the campaign of 1282, so leaving Dafydd and Llewellyn the last. Now, this is an interesting figure, Gwenllian. And alas, because I've realized that I just cannot do everything about Cymru in these lectures. We won't be looking at the daughter of Llewellyn the last, but Gwenllian, there's quite a sad story associated with Gwenllian. There are three Gwenllians in history. The one that died near Denby Castle, Gwenllian Field. And we've got this Gwenllian and the daughter of Gwenllian as well. So, giving you a sort of bit of more of a structure to understand what's going on. And this is figure here. This is Llywelyn the Great. There were two figures in the history of Cymru to be referred to as great. Rhodri Mawr, who was a great king well before the Norman conquest of England. And you've got Llywelyn Fawr. So you've got Rhodri Fawr and now Llywelyn Fawr, which means great. And he died in 1140. So then within 40 years, everything that was Cymru, everything which was independent, was now gone. So what we're going to do, we're going to get straight to this other wonderful site. And slides are a little bit slow today. But as we're waiting, we are now at Dafydd Castle. Dafydd retreated to Dafydd Castle. This is in the heart of Gwynedd. He was supported by various refugees. The princes and lords of Deheubarth, West Wales, the lords and princes of Powys, and any leaders that could come up from Glamorgan or Maddog. And the thing is, and Del, we've got too much background noise there. You're okay.
Sorry, I forgot to take my pill.
Okay. It's all right. Right, so this is Dafydd Castle. So he's joined with all the princes and lords of Cymru who had resisted. Most of them had resisted Edward I. And with limited resources of manpower and equipment available, this was the area that Dafydd was to make his last stand. But no sooner had he refortified this wonderful site at Dafydd, which is quite an imposing site. It stands up across the landscape. There's Dafydd Castle near Blaenau Ffestiniog. You can actually see it on the road from Blaenau Ffestiniog all the way to the coastal road, the A5. So Dafydd Castle is the place that he wants to make a last stand. But alas, it's not the place to make a last stand. Because as soon as it's surrounded by the troops of Edward I, it's going to make him very, very vulnerable. So just a little bit of a look at this site. It's a very small site inside, and you can imagine that if you've got an army of 500 English and Norman soldiers surrounding this, you're going to be completely cut off. And if you're seeing a prolonged siege, you're not going to last long. So you're not going to be able to get supplies in there, and things are going to get very bad. So what happened, Dafydd, this last stronghold of those sites constructed by the princes of old, was to be abandoned. And lots of the damage that we see at Dafydd Castle is from around this time, because it was one of those castles that needed to be slighted and put out of action. So those damnable rebels should never ever rebel again. Again, nice little plan. Because we haven't done Dafydd and we haven't really mentioned it, I'd just like to mention that most of what you can see at Dafydd Castle has been constructed by the princes. So this wonderful tower built in the early 1200s, and in the latter part of the 1200s, say about 1270 odd, you've got this curtain wall, and then what you do find is you get the rest of it being constructed. So most of what you do see at Dafydd is built by the princes of old. Now, it's said that this actually comes into play when we look at the likes of Owain Glyndŵr, but it's very difficult to go into Owain Glyndŵr when you're looking at this moment, that this wonderful expanse of history that is within a few footnotes of our past, but very important when we're talking about the sense of independence. We've already been to this site, and Del, can you tell me which site this is? We did it not so long ago.
Oh, is it Castell Bran?
Castell y Berry.
y Berry, that's the one.
Castell y Berry is very, that would be in Llangollen Way. Castell y Berry is on the coast. So basically, Dafydd moved to Castell y Berry. And that was a wise move to make. It's not far away from the coast. It's got brilliant views, and it's got its own well, and it could hold out in a siege. But unfortunately, when you're thinking about holding out in a siege, who is actually going to relieve you when it's only Dafydd now? He's all alone. In April, Castell y Berry was besieged by a mighty English army. When I say mighty, it's not far off the numbers that were involved on the Norman side when you look at the Battle of Hastings generations before. It's remarked that 300 of Edward I's men was besieging Castell y Berry. And with this sense of the site being besieged, there was a great deal of panic. I was a small garrison meant to hold out against this great siege. You know, the English have got the numbers. And the commander, Cynfrig ap Maddog, a wonderful name, Cynfrig ap Maddog, surrendered on the 25th of April. And Dafydd's hopes were not ended there. He decided to abandon. He managed to escape. He decided to abandon. And he decided to head back up north. So you can imagine that the territory that was controlled by Dafydd was shrinking by the moment. And he thought that the best thing he can do is to actually fly into the landscape of his ancestors. And hopefully on the backdrop of the landscape of his ancestors, he might be able to find the kin and strength to resist the English and the Normans who were close behind him. So the site I'd like to go to next is Lam Baden. And we have actually looked at Lam Baden already. But just sort of showing you, this is a little bit of what Castell y Berry once looked like. And it's just a load of stones now. Because at that stage, it was just, it was being slighted, and, you know, the English didn't want it to be used against them again. We've already been to this site, and we did this a few weeks ago. This is Lam Baden Castle. And this is on the foothills of Snowdonia, and it was believed in May 1283 that this rebellion could continue. They didn't give up. Now, we're not talking about cowards. We're talking about very brave individuals as well, and not brave men, brave women and daughters. You know, his family was with him, and women wished to fight as well. This was not just a rebellion of the men. This was a rebellion of the ladies of Cymru. This site itself, he's there in May 1283. Remember, if you look at the period of Owain Glyndŵr, this is a site that Owain Glyndŵr has to capture, and he does. So it's said, and I will quote, Lam Baden Castle, very near a site known as Abergwyngregin, but that's a little bit much further north. The royal home of the princes of the north, but we've already looked at Abergwyngregin. It's a little bit of a distance, but Abergwyngregin is nearby, really, in that mindset. It's said as follows, a rather interesting quote here. Those who survived fled for refuge to the inaccessible rocks of Snowdonia. And Dafydd, with a few followers, hid himself for some months at different places and suffered hunger and cold. When they were forced to abandon this site, the English and the Norman were close on their tail. So there is our Lam Baden, just showing it on the map again. It said at last he retreated to a bog near Berra Mawr, about 4 miles above Aber. So he had headed all the way north. His gang had headed all the way north, heading towards the coast, maybe wishing to escape. Maybe this is the plan. So they're heading north. And with this, he took with him his wife, 2 sons, and 7 daughters. However, the place of his retreat, a special cave, a place that would hold many princes for generations before Dafydd, was a place that was known about by the Bishop of Bangor, Einion, who told Edward I where he might find the last true leader of North Wales, the last true leader of Cymru. For on June 22nd, Dafydd and his younger son, Owen ap Dafydd, were captured from the secret hiding place just south of Abergwyngregin. Irony is the moment of the cave. Dafydd, seriously wounded in the struggle, was brought to King Edward's camp at Readlyn that very same night. Probably being dragged all the way, actually, but that's another story. I've done a little bit of research on his children and his wife. They didn't fare much better. They survived for a little bit longer. Edward I wished to expunge any ability for the people of Cymru to rebel against him. Another image. We actually now go to Readlyn Castle. Lots of images and castles today. So Readlyn Castle. So Readlyn was the place where Dafydd was taken. And it's said that Dafydd was taken from here to Chester and then on to Shrewsbury. Dafydd's wife, Elizabeth, and their daughter, Gwadlais, infant niece, Gwenllian fy Llywelyn. So Gwenllian fy Llywelyn is the daughter of his brother, Llywelyn ap Gruffydd. And Dafydd's 6 illegitimate daughters were also taken prisoner at the same time. Whether they were with Dafydd and Owen at Berra is not recorded, but it is likely that they were. On the 28th of June, Llywelyn ap Dafydd was captured. Edward triumphantly proclaimed that the last of the treacherous lineage, princes of the turbulent nation, was now in his grasp, captured by men of his own nation. And from this moment, we're going to refer to Cymru in the English word, Wales or Welsh. This is interesting. Just a quick thing about Readlyn Castle. Readlyn Castle was one of the first concentric castles built in North Wales. What a concentric castle is that it's got an external wall, an internal wall, and another wall that is basically a keep. And this is basically where Conway goes, Beaumaris Castle, in a way Halach, but we definitely look at Carnarvon, which is a concentric castle. And this is all, we're told, based on what's had been witnessed from the Holy Land and how the Sahaldin built his fortifications in the Holy Land, where you've got these concentric walls within walls within walls. And Readlyn is one of those. Moving on. So, you know, I mentioned the sense of hung drawing and quartering, and we'll actually go on to that. But he wasn't condemned to death straight away, which is rather interesting. So we'll come on to that in a moment. So there's Readlyn Castle, and this is where we go. Now I've got lots of different images associated with other people that have been hung, drawn, and quartered. A certain pirate known as Alfredo Moranesco, which Peter will be familiar with, in 1242 was hung, drawn, and quartered. But I did say at the beginning that the idea of hung, drawn, and quartering in the way that Dafydd was treated was more or less invented by Edward I. Alfredo Moranesco didn't suffer the same deal of hung, drawn, and quartering that Dafydd actually suffered. Welsh resistance to the invasion temporarily came to an end. When I say temporarily, it would come back in a not so long. On the 28th of June, Edward issued writs to summon a parliament to meet at Shrewsbury to discuss Dafydd's fate. On the 30th of September, Dafydd ap Gruffydd, Prince of Wales, was condemned to death. Princip Wallace, that would be how it would be in the Latin. Princip Wallace the principle of Wales. This is how the English would refer to it as. The first person known to have been tried and executed for what from that time onwards would be described as high treason against the king. Edward ensured that Dafydd's death was to be slow and agonizing, and also historic. It was historic, folks. He became the first prominent person in recorded history to have been hanged, drawn, and quartered. Now, it should actually be called drawn, hanged, drawn, and quartered. And the reason why is as follows. Here we go. Dafydd was dragged through the streets of Shrewsbury, attached to a horse's tail, then hanged alive. So there we go. He's being drawn. Drawn also means something else. So he's drawn, hanged, and drawn in a different way, and quartered. So let's sort of get into this a little bit more. So after he had been hung, he was to be revived again. And that would be quite a nice image showing Dafydd. His eyes are still open. He was not to be hung, his neck was, he was not to be hung and his neck broken until he's dead. He was meant to be hung, neck not broken. He's to be then hanged alive, if that means anything to you guys. And then, as he's passed out, he's drawn. This is what drawing means. What you do, you slice, sometimes from, actually the best way is actually drawing from the base. And as you're drawing, your guts fall out. Stop, take the guts, place it into a fire and burn the guts. And then you draw all the way up, taking the organs out, dangling them from the body, the liver and the kidney. And then you might hold the beating heart in front of the man's face and snatch the heart out, at which point the guy's going to be dead. But some people can actually survive for quite some, when I say quite some time, a minute, 2 minutes, you know, whilst their heart has been taken out of their body. It's said that when some people were guillotined, that people's eyes would still move and people were still thinking for about 45 seconds to a minute later. So disemboweled and his entrails burned before him for his sacrilege in committing his crimes in the week of Christ's Passion. Because when you think about it, he declared war on the English in Easter 1282. So he was committed as committing a crime against Christ, actually. And then his body cut into 4 quarters. Now, what happens next? Let's have a little look at that one. So here we go. And it said that his body was cut into 4 quarters for plotting the king's death. Geoffrey of Shrewsbury was paid 20 shillings for carrying out the gruesome act on the 3rd of October, 1282. Dafydd's daughter Gwadlys, like her cousin Gwenllian Fyr Llywelyn, was sent to a convent in Lincolnshire. Gwenllian to Sempringham and Gwadlys to 6 Hills, where she died in 1336. None of these daughters of the princes actually knew they were of aristocratic even aristocratic birth, even till their very end. And the interesting thing is that Gwenllian was paid to be at Sempringham by her own cousin, Edward I, because they were related. Dafydd's sons were both imprisoned at Bristol. Llywelyn ap Dafydd died at Bristol in mysterious circumstances in 1287, while Owen ap Dafydd is last found living in August 1325. Dafydd may have had another son, Dafydd Goch, who survived. So we've gone into enough detail there, and I don't want to sort of go on any further here. It sort of talks about the children and what happened to them and so on. But there you go. The head of Llywelyn would have been displayed. So where we're going to go next is the second rebellion. This is the rebellion of Rhys ap Meredydd, M-A-R-E-D-U-D-D. Now, Meredydd had been very much a supporter of his kin in North Wales. Dafydd paid tribute to Llywelyn ap Gruffydd in the north, and Meredydd had been friends with Llywelyn ap Gruffydd in the north. However, this is rather interesting. We are now at Droesloin. We're now at Droesloin Castle. No, we're not. We're not at Droesloin. Hang on a minute. This is the wrong blooming site. Hang on. Yes, we've got to go. No, this is where we've got to start. Not Droesloin, we've got to go to Denver. Sorry about that. In 1277, he had submitted to Edward, surrendering the castle of Denevor, but being allowed to retain Droesloin. In 1282, Prince Llywelyn ap Gruffydd put forward grievances on Rhys's behalf against the royal officers in West Wales, but Rhys himself not only abstained from the revolt, but gave assistance to Edward I, joining in the attack on Lam Baden and patrolling Ceredigion for the king in the absence of the royal commander. So in other words, when we look at Rhys ap Meredydd, after he'd given up his castle of Denevor and kept Droesloin, the interesting and powerful thing is that Rhys ap Meredydd sided with Edward I, so he was a bit of a traitor to his kind. He thought that the best thing to do, and there's Droesloin in close proximation with Denevor, he basically sided with Edward I, and basically he sided with the side that he thought was going to win. Now, this is always commented on the history of the princes in Cymru. If we had been united from day one, fighting one common enemy, it's likely that we'd be an independent land. But what Edward I did, he actually played lords and princes up against each other, and he particularly did that in Scotland to quite good effect. After 1283, he was recognised, that's Rhys ap Meredydd, as the key chieftain in West Wales. He wasn't in control of a great kingdom, as his forefathers had once been in control of. This is the wonderful Droesloin Castle, and when we look at Droesloin Castle, what we do see is a site that is very much popular, very much in control of the landscape, very much thriving. So why would Rhys ap Meredydd want to give all that up? So he basically sided with Edward I. He was a traitor to his own kind. So he's very comfortable, and it's a wonderful site. But something should happen in 1287. Look at this wonderful, very imposing, very, very powerful site. Sort of run forward a bit. By 1287, the site was captured and then it was abandoned. But before we actually go there, again, reminding where we are, and that's the other site that I mentioned up there, Lam Baden, which is Lam Baden is the place that he had sort of attacked on behalf of Edward I. Now, what's happening now is that Rhys ap Meredydd, on the 8th of June, 1287, reckons that he can take on Edward I. I don't know why he thinks that, but he reckons that he can take on Edward I. He reckons that he can put an army together, he can lead a rebellion, he can do more successful than Llywelyn ap Gruffydd and Dafydd ap Gruffydd in the north. He reckons he can do far better. This is 1287, and what he does, he leads this rebellion. And in the line of the rebellion, he actually spreads the rebellion from his base at Droesline. He captures Lam Baden in 1287, and also he then heads towards West Wales, and he actually then captures Newcastle, Emmeline, and he also heads towards Brycheiniog. So his rebellion is quite a sizable rebellion when you sort of look at it. It's sort of this type of rebellion. So it's a good chunk of West Wales. And he actually heads towards Newcastle, Emmeline. And what we do see within the archaeology, when we think about the archaeology, what we do see is there is evidence in the archaeology of these rebellions. It's not just hearsay. It's just not the wanton word of what I'm actually reading. Because when you look at the damage associated with Droesline, and then you look at the damage associated with Newcastle, Emmeline Castle, that you'll see. So, you know, we've got the rebellion again. So we've got this site captured and destroyed. This site captured and destroyed. He's gone to Brycheiniog. Is at this stage also attacked Denby Castle. So the rebellion's going really, really well. It's going extremely well. So not only destroying Newcastle, Emmeline, he captures it on the 20th of January, 1288. So his rebellion is lasting longer than Llywelyn the Last's. So it's rather interesting the way this is actually playing out. So let's have a quick look at Newcastle, Emmeline Castle. And okay, as this sort of goes on, there it is. And what we have is Newcastle, Emmeline Castle. It's not much to look at. It was changed a bit later on, but it would have suffered extensive damage. However, by 1289, the whole game was up. He tries to escape to Ireland, but he's a last caught. And we don't know what happens with him between 1289 and 1292. But the terrible fate awaits him in 1292. He's executed in York. He's hung, drawn, and quartered. And again, that's another Welsh rebel to see his fate at the hands of Edward I and the Normans and the English. However, this next rebellion is probably a very successful rebellion. And the reason why it's a very successful rebellion is if you look at this map, you can see that this next rebellion of Maddog ap Llywelyn in 1294 is mentioned in lots of places. You know, occasionally what you see, oh, Caerphilly was besieged by Maddog ap Llywelyn, and you don't read anything else. Morlais Castle, north of Merthyr Tydfil, was destroyed and captured by Morlais Castle. Cenffig was burnt to the ground, and it's quite likely that Cenffig never returned, and the sand dunes moved in. He destroyed Builth Wells Castle. This is a major successful rebellion. And lots of people, lots of those lords and ex-leaders were really not happy with Edward I. And there was a plan, may I add, Adele. The plan was that in 1294, it was thought that Edward I would be campaigning in France. The revolt surpassed in longevity only by the revolt of Owain Glyndŵr in the 1400s. So it was quite a long rebellion. Maddog had been the son of the last prince of Meirionydd, which is basically, when you look at it, Gwynedd is divided into two parts. You've got Anglesey, and you've got the mainland Meirionydd. That was eventually taken over by the House of Aberthraw, but you know, he's directly linked to the royal line of the lords and princes of Meirionydd. And he seems to keep out of this. He seems to keep out of the way. You know, it's 1294. And Edward I hadn't got rid of all the rebels. In fact, Edward I did a pretty crap job of getting rid of all those rebels, because he left lots of those rebels behind. This is what we're talking about. We're talking about a major rebellion with all these little sort of flags in there. So what we're talking about, Michaelmas, the 29th of September, 1294 is the date of the rebellion. Maddog put himself at the head of a national revolt in response to the actions of new administrators in the north and west Wales, and the imposition of taxes such as that levied on 1/15 of all movables. So in other words, you were taxed. You had to pay 1/15 of everything that was movable over to the king. So, you know, this wasn't thought to be fair. And as I say, he's of royal lineage, and he was also a cousin to Dafydd ap Gruffydd. So he was actually very much of royal blood. Now, the uprising had been planned for months, in fact, maybe years. It was a long planned uprising. It was such a long planned uprising that they had stockpiles of arms. They had maps. They knew exactly what they wanted to do. So this little map here, what we're talking about is that the rebellion spread like wildfire. It sort of went across all the way through to Carnarvon, back down the coastal board. And there was rebellions in the south, and it was quite a major rebellion. And eventually the rebellion ended up here, which is a rather interesting battle. It's a battle that could have changed the fate of the nation, but alas, another moment in history that things didn't change the way we would like them to have changed when we look at this side of the border. So the uprising was something in the planning. And it was so planned that the attacks on the sites of those Norman and English castles were coordinated. They were all to take place on the 29th of September in 1294. And that was not an easy thing to do that in that day and age. You know, you have to have people hanging around thinking, right, 1294, hang on, 12 o'clock, you know, that type of thing. It would have been quite something to have planned this. So Maddog declared himself as the rightful ruler of Cymru. And it was thought that whilst the rebellion was going on, King Edward and most of his forces would be in France, because he had been told that the king had planned a campaign against the French. However, unfortunately, due to bad weather, Edward's army had not yet sailed, and he quickly cancelled the French campaign to deal with the Welsh uprising. So unfortunately, things didn't go his way, but they did go his way for a short while. So what we've got lots of castles to look at. So for the remaining time we've got now, let's just look at them. So Hawarden, Flintshire, you got Flint Castle, you got Readlyn, you got Readlyn, Conway, Carnarvon, Griffith, Harlech, Castleberry. So this is the route we're going to start to go on. So memorize that, folks. So here we go. Waiting for the next image to come up. Carnarvon. Wow. Do you know, interesting enough, Carnarvon Castle was captured. They captured this, they captured it. Carnarvon at this point was complete. They actually captured this castle, which was no mean feat, because it was a concentric castle. It had a town. Madog's forces occupied this castle. As with Castleberry, now the castle that we looked at earlier on along the coast, that was captured as well. And that Castleberry, Hawarden, which is that site that we've already mentioned. Hawaiian Castle was mentioned. Ruthing as well, on the way to Readlyn. Denby Castle was captured as well. Gruffydd. So let's look at all these sites. I've got an image of all these sites as we sort of go through it. So let's just go through that. Now this is Castleberry. It was actually it was destroyed by Edward I, and then it was refortified, and then it was again destroyed by the Welsh rebels. And this itself is that site Hawaiian, which we've already mentioned. And this is a rather interesting one. This is Readlyn Castle, which is a very strange site. It's basically part of a private estate now, Readlyn Castle. It's not a great castle, but you know, it's there for people to see. So that's inside. And then what we then have, so what we've done, we've moved up, and we're now going to go to Denby Castle. So there we go, Denby and Denby Castle. Look at it. Doesn't that look impressive? Now, have you actually been to this one, or Ruthyn, or have you been to Hawaiian? Have you been to any of those?
Not the North Wales ones. Sort of Castell y Berer and Harlech is sort of the furthest north that I've been. I've seen them from the road, a couple of them.
Yeah,
but
never
just the ones that are sort of on the main roads.
Now this is Denby Castle. It looks quite imposing, but again, this was captured. Lots of these captures were destroyed. Lots of these castles were destroyed and burnt. You may ask me, how is it they were able to capture Carnarvon Castle? Well, you know, lots of these sites were actually garrisoned by very small numbers of men. Did you know that the garrison of the Caerphilly Castle was probably only about 40, 50 men? The whole point of having a castle built that way is that you only need a small number of men to actually man its walls. So Denby Castle, and then we go to this one. This is Gruffydd Castle. This is one of those native build castles of the princes. D-shaped towers, yeah, the D-shaped towers, which are typical. This had been up until 1283 garrisoned by the Welsh, but now it was in the hands of the English. Gruffydd was besieged for several months. It wasn't itself completely captured. The town would have been. And also the other one that you've just mentioned, Del, there's beautiful castle on the coast, by the way, Harlech Castle. So Harlech Castle was one of those that could have fallen, but it didn't. But of somewhat, maybe not more interest, but some more of connected interest is this site. This is actually above Merthyr Tydfil. This is Morlais Castle. This is a huge castle. Very few people know that Morlais Castle is there. Look at these impressive walls. Look at where the main towers are. Now this is Morlais Castle. It's a big castle, and you look around it. This is being cut out to actually bring in building material for the castle itself. So these rock cut ditches. Morlais Castle, amazingly enough, just north of Merthyr Tydfil. I can hear a bird in the background, Del.
Yeah. I'll switch off.
No, Del, no, it's fine. We want birds. You've obviously not been to this one, Del, no?
No.
Morlais Castle was captured also by Morgan's allies in the south. They actually captured this one. A really impressive site. This fell. And again, this site was so devastated by the Welsh rebels, it never really came into its own again. And it's a really impressive site. Also to fall was this site, the castle at Builth Wells. I've been to the castle at Builth Wells. It's a rather interesting site. You've got to get up onto the mound to sort of understand it. And that's the mound today. It would have had stone walls and defences and all the rest of it. And this site was actually besieged for 6 weeks. And more more relevant really, when all of us have seen Caerphilly Castle, is that the entire town around Caerphilly was burnt. It was completely destroyed, and they besieged Caerphilly Castle, but they never ever captured it. But one site that they did actually capture, which never recovered, was this one. Dell will be aware of this. This is a painting from the 1700s of what the wonderful Kenfig Castle used to look like. Before Kenfig, this is after naturally, but Kenfig Castle was destroyed, burnt to the ground, and it's likely that most of the town was destroyed as well, and its churches, and obviously it was overrun by the sand in subsequent generations. This is another rather interesting one, and we're now back to Denby Castle. So this had been a rather successful rebellion, and a rebellion that most people have not heard of. But there's one moment that changes everything, which we'll actually go on to. There's usually a downside with these rebellions. It was going so well. You know, Edward I was getting really frustrated, and Edward I was nearly killed due to this campaign. So Denby, after it was captured, eventually fell to the English. However, a relieving army on the way to Denby Castle to actually sort of, you know, get it away. When I say a relieving army, retake it away from the Welsh, for example. A large English army was ambushed outside the town on the 11th of November in 1294, and the ensuing battle, it was such vigorous, the English army ran away. So again, we've got a victory outside Denby that we never hear of. It's also when we actually, all the castles that were captured by the likes of the rebels, like Readlyn, one by one fell to the English because they just didn't have enough men to. They just didn't have enough men to keep them going. But what happened then is that the rebellion went another way. Whatever towns and villages it come across with any connection with the English or Normans, they burnt the towns and villages to the ground. In December 1294, Edward I decided to directly lead the armies into North Wales, stopping at Wrexham, Denby, which we've already seen, Abergele Castle, now at Conway. This is Conway, which was reached shortly just before Christmas. His campaign was timely, for several castles remained in serious danger. Harlech nearly fell, because Harlech was only held at that point by 37 men, which for a big castle like Harlech, only 37 of them actually remained at arms. And even Edward I was actually ambushed. And when Edward I was ambushed, he decided to abandon his wagon train. You know, all his goodies, you know, some of the golden treasury was abandoned to the rebels. And the town of Conway was burnt to the ground. And Edward besieged until he was relieved by his navy in 1295. So what we're talking about is when he actually got to the castle, he retreated inside, and he was being besieged himself. However, he was eventually relieved in 1294 by the navy. The whole point of castles like Conway is that they can be supplied by the sea, and Edward was right to build castles like Carnarvon, and even the likes of Harlech, because Harlech has actually sea access because the land has been reclaimed since. So his idea about having these sites being supplied by the sea is very, very important, and it saved Edward I's life. So coming to the end now, we now look at a moment in history that changes everything. And it's known as the Battle of Maddog, which is rather interesting because it's named after Maddog himself. So here we go. A nice little description. I've got two descriptions here, so I'll do both. The crucial battle between Maddog's men and those of the English crown occurred at the Battle of Maddog in Paris on the 5th of March, 1295. And it's very frustrating when people don't know where these places are. We'll go to the map now. This is it was a place. It is a place that is very near Llanfair in Paris. So Maddog. So if we go back, we'll go to this map if we can find it. We will go there now. There you go. And there is Llanfair So, you know, when we got this map in the background, you can actually see that the rebellion was quite a big rebellion. It was quite a chunky rebellion. It was the second biggest rebellion, you know, Wales has ever seen after Owain Doors. So here we go. The crucial battle on the 5th of March, 1295, surprised by an army led by the Earl of Warwick, who was one of the king's most competent generals, surprised the Welsh, but the Welsh army fought back very, very well. And it's said that Maddog, in that battle, they even held back a cavalry charge. His spearmen formed into a square and repelled the cavalry, killing around 10 men at arms, knights, or men at arms. However, Warwick innovative deployment of archers and crossbowmen gave the English the upper hand. Surrounded, Maddog's men fought their way out of the encirclement and killed a further 90 English men, then retreated across the swollen river, in which many drowned. A second smaller engagement near a place that the English records call Theswelt, the location of which remains uncertain, resulted in the loss of Maddog's supply train. English losses totaled around 100 dead. Welsh losses were placed at 200. The battle was a crucial step in the breaking Welsh resistance in the revolt. Maddog went to ground. However, when he went to ground, in escaping this episode with his life and as a fugitive until his capture in August 1295, he was subsequently taken to London, where he seems to have been kept in captivity for the rest of his life. He was still alive in 1312. He was survived by his sons. Now, before I just examine that one last thing that I just mentioned, the revolt in 1294-95 elicited a harsh response from Edward I in the form of humiliating and punitive ordinances, further restricting the civil rights and economy and social opportunities of the Welsh. And really things have not recovered since. However, it was not long before Llywelyn Bren, Lord of Sengennydd, led a second rebellion, aided by some of the more prominent marcher lords in 1316, which we do know about. Now, the interesting point with this, before we finish and open the mics up for questions, and the question is, why was he allowed to survive until 1312? Why? And I read this and I think this is really strange, because he had led a much more successful rebellion than Llywelyn ap Gruffydd, Dafydd ap Gruffydd, and his predecessor, Rhys ap Meredydd. And you're thinking, well, you know, he was very successful. He was allowed to live. And I'm thinking maybe he was respected. So what I'm going to say now, Del, have you got any questions on this tonight?
No, that was really interesting. Yeah, I learned quite a bit tonight, especially about some of the castles we see about, and again about our proper history.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we looked at quite a lot tonight, and I actually halfway through I actually thought I wish I had only done 2 of these and not 3, but I did promised that we'd be looking at the Welsh princes, and that's what we've done. So Welsh princes and rebellions, and some of the last rebellions. But as I said, I do believe there were some rebellions after 1415, but there's so little information about them. And I'm still going to dig into that. And we didn't do the rebellion of Owen in 1370, another Owen. That seems to be a popular name. Just like to mention for those that joined us late, the women. The men were all here waiting. They were. So actually, before you say anything, Gillian, a man whose name shall not be mentioned, Goff, said that you were all tanning yourselves on the beach with your bikinis off, and Goff described how wonderful that image would be. Right, so next week we're going to be doing mansions. That's what I was going to say. So right, what I'm going to do, Goff, you have the first say, because you got to defend your honour. Was anything that I just said to Gillian then correct?
Absolutely, every word of it. Yep.
Gillian?
Yeah.
Well,
she knows that.
Knows he was there.
I was oiling her up.
Can you two stop it? Thank you. I nearly
the
choked.
WD-4.
Oh yeah, well you got aching limbs, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
Right, Goff, bring it to order, Goff. What would you like to say?
I'd like to know what sort of people were supporting these princes when they were revolting. Were they farmers or?
Do you know what? Do you know what? I wish somebody had asked me that months ago, because this is a rather strange situation, because in the notes you don't see anything about who was supporting them, and that is a really powerful. It's a really powerful question. I believe these were people who actually wanted to support. These were people that actually wanted to fight. These were actually some of the lesser lords. These were actually some of the common people who had lost their homes at the hands of the English. You know, these were people who had been displaced off the landscape. These were people who were proper rebels. These were people who wanted revenge. And those are the type we're talking about. We're not type of people. We're not talking about people with just pitchforks. These were people who wanted to fight the English, and they did very well fighting the English. And it was only by subterfuge that Llywelyn the Last was killed on the 11th of December 1282. He went to a peace conference. Edward I said, "Oh, don't bring your army with you, and come in peace." And he was killed. These were people who genuinely had a gripe against the English, and that really pushes you along. Those are the types of people. So everyone got off.
Welsh lives matter.
Welsh lives matter. Oh my God, I've said something racist now. Right, Del.
You've done me.
Oh no, I haven't. That's next week. Peter, anything you would like to say?
Well, you said that they were anxious to fight, but weren't a lot of them actually told you have to support your lord? Otherwise, you get chucked off the land.
No, actually, most of these people didn't have any land at that point. They'd already been displaced by Edward I, so they had nothing to lose. That is the direct question. When you're talking about those fighting for the English crown, they've got no choice. Everything that you just said is correct, Pete. But most of these people don't have any choice because they've already lost their homes, so they've got nothing to lose. What they've got with them is what they take into battle. So some of them may have been told, but the problem is, you can't go down that avenue when the kingdom of Cymru is already in the English hands after 1283. So the other two rebellions, the other two subsequent rebellions, are people that don't have Welsh lords, they have English lords, and they want to get their own back. So that's the difference. Someone
would have to harm them.
What's that?
Provide them with the arms to fight with.
Most of them. Most of the people who'd been displaced some of them would have had their own weapons, but they would have been armed. Some of these would have been armed. But the thing is, if you're capturing something like Carnarvon, it's going to have crossbows, it's going to have longbows, it's going to have swords. To be honest with you, Pete, you pick up what you use. You know what the crack is. You pick up what you can use. Okay. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm saying with
No, I know what you're saying.
with the
yeah.
other two rebellions, it's different. It's different, Pete. That's the word. Gillian, you know, you're looking like one of those dodgy women from a porn movie that I used to watch from the 1970s.
Still watching.
Well, you're still watching them, I know. Right, Gillian.
I'd like to know, are there any descendants of these princes?
Well,
Do
actually,
you know?
yeah, I know of one. He's actually on my Facebook page, and
Really?
he crops up every now and again. There are one or two descendants, and actually, one thing is in my notes. In my notes, you go through the notes, and you actually see, well, you know, there were Dafydd had children that are unaccounted for. You've got the likes of Meredydd has got children unaccounted for. So you're thinking all you need is one or two of them surviving, and you've got a royal line surviving. It's a very complicated question, that, Gillian, but they do survive. Right, Pat.
One of them came with us to Castle Kenneth, if I remember right. A certain Owen Llewellyn.
That's my son. Right, anyway, Rosamond, any news? Not any news. That's not a bloody Thursday, is it? Anything you would like to say, Rosamond? No, you can't. You can't hear her. The dragon, you can't hear you, Rosamond. Pat, what about you?
Mute. I'm
You're-
unmuted.
Well, Pat's unmuted as well. We'll have it from Pat first because she's from Russia.
I just wanted to say I really enjoyed identifying, naming, and locating all these different Welsh castles, because you never see or hear anything about them.
No, you don't. And I tell you, you are right. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much.
And you know, I part way through, if you noticed, I got the I was looking at I was saying that was Hawaiian Castle. It was actually Denver. I corrected myself there, and I thought, oh God. And I'd actually realized at that stage, I actually thought, my God, there's so many sites. I'm doing it too fast. And I thought, you know, but the thing is, we got so much to go through, and the big question is that you know, we've got another 6 of these to go, and we'll see where we are in a few weeks. Anyway, so Rosamond, you've got the last word tonight.
Oh, well, spectacular pictures of the castle, and I'm sort of agreeing there with Pat, about there's so many castles here in Wales, isn't there?
5,000.
You know, sadly, to keep the Welsh subjugated, I suppose, which is what we're covering with these rebellions.
Yeah.
Rather gory as well, with the hanging and the drawing and the quartering.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yes, really enjoyed that.
You know, we've got more
more of the castles.
Exactly.
Great.
Do you know, if you go to the Vale of Glamorgan, right, and you look at a map of the Vale of Glamorgan, and you just sat down, you could find 100 in that area alone. When I said 5,000, I actually thought about 5,000 chapels, but the number of castles is probably close more than over 1,000. We've got so many. So 5,000 chapels. We've got about 1,000 castles, and then we've got the manor house. Then we've got the manor houses. We've got the Motte and Baileys. We've got all the other military medieval sites. There's so much, and there's so much that's still left out there to find. So, yeah. So I really appreciated that tonight, you guys. You've been a great group. This has been recorded, so it will be going out. So if you've missed anything, the sound has been great this evening. There's been no interference. It's been absolutely brilliant. It's been a joy tonight. And thank you very much. I'll see you either tomorrow or some of you on Saturday. We're doing the work of Mary Trevelyan on Saturday, so it's not just a ghostly thing. So I'm going to say good night, Goff, Peter,
Bye.
Rosa, Gil,
Good night, all.
and Pat.
Good night.
And I really appreciate you joining me. Thank you
very much, Carl.
My
Good night,
pleasure.
all. Bye bye.
Yeah. Bye, all. See you tomorrow.
Appreciate your support. See you tomorrow. You know, I didn't even have to ask if you enjoyed that tonight because you all said you did, so it was great. Cool.
We did.
Cool. Well, I know you did, Gillian. You do. You enjoy any interaction with me at all.
All the time.
So
all the time.
in other words, what happened? Goff set himself up in the meeting he hopped out, met up with you and all the other women, right? Came back into the meeting. He pretended that nothing had happened, and then he told us.
Well, that's why I was late.
Exactly. On that note, I won't see you tomorrow, Gillian. Are you joining us on Saturday?
Yes, all being well, I shall try and be on time.
I think you'll like the Mary Trevelyan bit, because it's just like, yeah, it's nice and fluffy, that one.
Can I just ask you quickly? I won't keep you. Should Edward notify anybody about this find that he's had?
Well, the problem is it's iron, so it's and the date. It's going in the newsletter, and I think that the portable liaison officer in the National Museum of Wales should be notified, but I could do that for him if he wants. So I tell you what, I'll get an email over to the Portable Antiquities Scheme, and I'll get them to contact him. Okay, or
I
you.
mean, he hasn't done anything about it at all, Carl.
No.
And he has said, well, if you are ever down this way, he'd give it to you to have a look at. But he didn't know whether he should officially notify anybody.
I'll do that, and they will contact him. Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Thanks very much then.
My pleasure. And
see you on Saturday.
And hang around. I tell you what, if you lie on the beach, right, and you come across more cannonballs, right?
If I lie on the beach?
Yeah, I'm moving off.
If I'm on the beach, the tide will go out.
Queen Canute. All right then, Gillian.
Bye.
Bye. I'll see you Saturday.
Saturday. Okay. Bye now.
Take care. You too.
Bye.
Take care. And you two, I've made a phone call about the Cornwall trip. It's all sorted.
Okay.
And yes. Do you know what? Right. You know, I do believe I've mucked up the booking, because Kathy's. Oh yeah, Kathy is sharing a room with you, Pat.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, then that's fine. I thought she was doing a single this time.
Well, I hope not.
Right, so yeah, but basically, Kathy and Pat, and there's Rosamond and Claire.
Right.
So yeah. So anything you two want to ask before I go?
No. I'm fine. Good night.
Okay, good night.
Good night, Pete. What do you want to say, Pat?
I got a call from Dorothy. First I called her and she was happy and ready to go, and she'll see me tomorrow. And then tonight she said, oh, it was just too hot. She's really hot. And I said, I have an air-conditioned car. I have a shady tree to sit under. And she said, well, she's had a headache from the heat today. So I told her I'd call her tomorrow. So hopefully I'll just go over and pick her up.
Do you know what the best thing to do with Dorothy is? Just to go, yeah, exactly.
But I told her I'd call her. So what I'll do, I'll call her from outside the front door.
Yeah, and she'll
have to come.
You know, you think like me. That's the way. Yeah. No, actually, why didn't you knock the door and phone her?
Yeah, well, I'll do my best to get her to my back garden. I told her how pretty it is and how she's got to see my flowers and blah, blah, blah.
Well, she has to be there at 2 o'clock at least, for God's sake.
Yeah, she should be. And so if I pick her up at, well, I go over at 1:45, then get her over here by 2 or 2:15, and then we could sign on at 1:30 and see you. So all's well. That's what I just wanted to say. So anyhow, I'll do my best. Okay.
Yeah, you do your best, and I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay. Bye then. Bye.
Take care, Pat. Bye. Thank you very much, everyone listening today. God, when you're flowing, you know, looking at Dynevor and Droeslein and things like that, you make those little mistakes. And God, 5,000 castles in Cymru, but you know, we've got to at least be talking about at least 1,000, and it's quite an amazing thing when we think about that. Yeah. Anyway, anyone who's watching or listening to this, be pleased to hear with what you've got to say. Thank you.